Manana si Diyos, Imina 35 na legislature in Guahan is called to order. At this time, I would ask, will Senator Mary Torres please kindly lead us in prayer? Please rise.
Kinaan ni Tata ilahina ni Espiritu Santo. Amen. Tatan mami ni gaigihaw gilangit, umatuna inaan mo, umamalay gubit no mo, umafatina si pinto mo, tay mano gitano tay guihi gilangit. Na iham pago nui kadahaw ani ni agon mami. Sano si iham nui dipin mami, tay guihi in asisi idimutibiham siha. Datsap mo ham pumupulot na infant basnak gitentasyon, lo nafan libriham gitayladi. Amen. Ginaani Tatay lihina dan Espiritu Santo.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator Torres, for the recognition of a recipient of Imiladan Mastakiluna Sacrificial, Senator Regine Biscoli, you are recognized.
Si Diyos Masi, Madam Speaker, and good morning, colleagues. On behalf of a grateful island and country, we honor Cook Petty Officer, 3rd Class, World War II, Gabriel M. Mancipit, and the family of Cook Petty Officer, 3rd Class, Gabriel M. Mancipit, for making the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense for our island and country.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator Biscoli, and for the recitation of the Inifresi, Senator Lee, you're recognized.
Inifresi, ginini mastakilu, gina soku, imastakulum gikurasonhu, zani masfigu, nani nasinyahu, hu ufresen maisudu, para baiputai, zanu defendi, ihinengi, ikutura, ilingwahi, aidi, hanum zanitanu tamoru. Ni iren shakureretu ginanazu strata, esti hu fitma gihilui Biblia, zani banderahu I banderan Guahan.
Si Diyos Masi, Senator Lee, and for the singing of the Guam hymn and the national anthem, I ask that my colleagues, the gentlemen in the room, if they could join us in singing the Guam hymn and the national anthem.
Chamoru urita nota kantai matunan hagi tolu ilugai Parahi honra parahi gloria abibai is la semparai Parahi honra parahi gloria abibai is la semparai Todo I tempo I pas parahita Jangin ni langit na bendition Contrite peligro na fan sa fuham Dus proteis lan Guam Contrite peligro na fan sa fuham Dus proteis lan Guam Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs burst our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Si Diyos maasi. Manana si Diyos Tatlu. Madam Clerk, Hadzi Mangagi Gwini put for vote. Roll call.
Senator Castro. Senator Lee. Senator Marsh Titano. Senator Moylan. Senator Munya. Speaker Munya Barnes.
Manana si Diyos Gagya.
Vice Speaker Nelson. Senator Perez. Senator Ragel. Senator San Augustine. Senator Shelton. Senator Taidagui. Senator Pito Terlahi. Senator Therese Terlahi. Senator Torres. Madam Speaker, there is a quorum.
Si Diyos maasi, Madam Clerk. At this time, I would recognize Majority Leader Vice Speaker Nelson. You are recognized.
Mananasitos, Madam Speaker, I move to approve the legislative journals dated January 27, 2020 and February 24, 2020, subject to corrections.
On the motion to approve the legislative journals dated January 27, 2020 and February 24, 2020, subject to corrections, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Majority Leader Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Sijus Maasi, Madam Speaker, there are communications and petitions, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that communications and petitions be appended to today's session journal, are there any objections? If there are no objections, motion carries. Majority Leader Vice Speaker Nelson, you are still recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are messages from Imagahagan Guahan, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion that messages from Imagahagan Guahan be appended to today's session journal, are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none, motion carries. Vice Speaker Nelson, Majority Leader, you are recognized.
Sijus Maasi, Madam Speaker, there are reports for standing committees, and I move that they be appended to today's session journal.
On the motion, colleagues, that reports of standing committees be appended to today's session journal, are there any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Majority Leader Vice Speaker Nelson, you are still recognized.
Madam Speaker, there are no reports of select committees. Madam Speaker, I move that bills introduced, bill numbers 272-35 COR through 279-35 COR, 280-35 LS, through 282-35 LS, and 283-35 COR through 305-35 COR, and resolutions introduced, resolution numbers 293-35 COR, 294-35 LS, through 296-35 LS, and 297-35 COR, through 309-35 COR, be deemed to have been given their first reading.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing or seeing none, motion carries. Majority Leader Vice Speaker Nelson, you are still recognized.
Madam Speaker, I move that all congratulatory, commendatory, and condolence resolutions introduced today and for the remainder of this legislative session be considered first read and adopted to allow the Legislative Council to make technical corrections and to add all senators as co-sponsors.
On that motion, without any objection, motion carries. Vice Speaker Majority Leader Nelson, you're still recognized to excuse.
Forgive me, Madam Speaker, I move to excuse senators not present for today's legislative session.
On that motion, hearing no objections, Motion carries. We are right now in legislative concurrence, and at this time, I will ask Senator March Tachino, I will recognize you.
Sujus Maasi, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Heritage and the Arts, Parks, Guam Products, Hagatna Revitalization, Self-Determination, and Regional Affairs. Hereby reports out the nomination of Chris Duenas to serve as a member of the Department of Parks and Recreation Board of Commissioners with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing none or seeing none, motion carries. Senator March Tachino, as Vice Chair, can you please, I recognize you for a second motion.
Sujus Maasi, Madam Speaker. I move to place in the voting file from the Committee on Public Accountability, Human Resources, and the Guam Buildup the nomination of David N. Sanford to serve as a member, private sector representative of the Government of Guam Retirement Fund Board of Trustees with the recommendation to do confirm.
On that motion, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Colleagues, we are now in second reading, and at this time, I will recognize Senator Sabina Flores Perez on Bill number 53-35 COR.
Good morning, Madam Chair, and thank you. I move to place Bill 53-35 COR. It's an act to add new section 63101DD and 63116.3 and amend section 63129 and 63128, all of Article 1, Chapter 63, Title 5, Guam Code annotated relative to the prohibition of fishing with the use of self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, Scuba, and similar devices into the waters of Guam or in any vessel in the waters of Guam. In the second reading file. And,
On the third.
In the third reading file. And
But,
I wish,
Senator, if I may, can you please inform our colleagues after the bill number as substituted? Can you read?
so this is Bill number 53-35 COR as substituted by the Committee on the Economic Development, Agriculture, Maritime, Transportation, Power, Energy, Utilities, and Emergency Response.
To the third.
So I move it to place it on the third reading file, and I wish to
with-
speak upon it.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So Bill 5335 will protect Guam's reefs and vulnerable fisheries by ending the harmful practice of scuba fishing in Guam's waters. The bill is a response to the growing environmental cultural threat. In recent decades, our people have witnessed a staggering drop in fish stocks. In a recent study of 832 coral reefs in 64 localities, 2 stood out for having fish biomass low enough to constitute fisheries collapse: Papua New Guinea and Guam. Many in our community, including a number of our commercial and sport fishermen, have expressed their concerns to me. They have seen firsthand, and they themselves have done firsthand, scuba fishing that allows for targeting of reef fish at greater depths and at greater efficiency than our traditional fishing methods. In fact, scuba fishing is so effective that it's more akin to harvesting than fishing. This relentless practice prevents struggling fish stocks from regenerating, which are essential to the health of our coral reef ecosystem. Studies show that unrestrained scuba fishing can contribute significantly to the fisheries collapse. 2 species in particular are vulnerable to scuba fishing: the tuhong, or the humphead parrotfish, and tengisan, the humphead wrasse. Both require the ability to grow large in deep waters before returning and repopulating reefs. However, with the advent of scuba fishing, the largest of these fish are now being targeted in deep waters with startling efficiency. And data compiled by the Department of Agriculture shows that recorded catches of these fishes were caught by scuba fishing. Not only does scuba fishing harm the livelihoods of all our fishermen, but our tourism economy is suffering as well. Snorkeling and recreational scuba diving are significant industries to our island. With disappearing fish stocks, our reefs are weakened. We must act now if we hope to save our fisheries and reefs from ecological demise. This bill ends scuba fishing when capturing live fish, and this practice was banned in Hawaii and after the industry grew large and destructive. It's important that we regulate the practice here before it becomes too late and too unsustainable. Bill 5335 aims to improve the safety of all our fishermen. Currently, scuba fishing is reducing the fish populations found at shallower depths, forcing all fishermen, including free divers, to go deeper and deeper. And this is extremely dangerous and unsafe for scuba fishermen who need to chase depleting fish populations at ever greater depths. The solution cannot simply be to dive deeper indefinitely while fish stocks die off. The solution must focus on sustainability. Our ancestors faced challenges in the past. They managed the fish stocks. They were wise stewards who preserved the environment and their fishing practices for us. And now it's our turn to come together to take responsibility, preserve our resource and cultural way of life for generations to come. I view this bill as our community coming together to establish the rules that apply to all of us. Scuba fishing is certainly not the only risk we face. Climate change, pollution, erosion, storm runoffs also threaten our waters. We need to do more. We need to be better enforce existing laws, and we need to invest in education. I thank the Director of Agriculture for taking the great strides, but we still need scuba fishing ban if we want meaningful change. The ban proposed has already been adopted in other nations and jurisdictions, including the CNMI, and this has been tested and supported by most Pacific Island nations. We should follow their lead of our sister islands and end this destructive practice that is not cultural, not historical, not safe, and not sustainable. The decisions we make today will have far-reaching implications. If we fail to address our dying reefs, our people will lose this practice that defines us. If we take action now, we not only preserve our fishing culture, but we can help thrive again in a sustainable and economically viable way. And I hope it's not too late. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Perez. Anyone else wishing to speak on the question on the main motion? Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, on the main motion. Yeah. On the main bill. Anyone else? Senator Kelly Marsh Teitzno, I will recognize you.
Sujus Maasi, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this bill. It was an important set of public hearings to have, and you can see as you read through the committee report, there were a lot of important perspectives and a lot of significant information to read through. And the author of the bill, I feel, did a really good job in highlighting the main issues. So what really stood out to me as I was reading through all of the public comments is that this isn't part of the tradition, that Imanautal Motna and Chamorro ancestors and all of the people who have descended from that until the 60s perhaps did not use scuba. In fact, there are over 200 types of fishing throughout Micronesia, each of which are an amazing feat and something to be proud of. Imanautal Motna, ancient Chamorros, they were scientists, they were masters, they were skilled technicians, they were biologists, they were marine biologists, they were architects, they were engineers, and masters of so many different types of knowledge. And those traditions that they developed while they were here that are special to Guahan and the Marianas, They were not stagnant. Part of what is so amazing about Imanautamotna was that they listened to data and the environment. They adapted, they revised, they improved, they changed, they invented, they were clever in many of those ways. Traditionally, every Pacific Island society had bans, they had rules, they had regulations, they had etiquette as to how to interact with the environment. And many have talked about a special ethos that Pacific Islanders, including Chamorros, have, that they work with nature and they do not fight it or attempt to conquer it. They think generationally. In fact, one of the most common statements is that our resources do not belong to us. We are borrowing them from future generations. And as was stated, supporting this ban supports many things. It is part of protecting cultural forms of fishing. And as several of those that provided testimony said, along with those forms of fishing, we are protecting a way of life. We are protecting a way of gathering together with family and friends. We are protecting the sharing of a catch caught traditionally. And as they said in their testimony, that we need to be proactive. If not, we have much to lose and too much will be short-lived. So again, I state my support for this bill.
Si Jus Masi, Senator Marsh Teichno, Senator Teresa Lahi, on the main motion, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When this bill was heard, we were in session at the time, and we yielded session to have a public hearing at 3 p.m. The public hearing that day lasted until 7:30 p.m. It was another one of those marathon public hearings that we have. But on this one, we were not allowed really to ask questions, but we were able to listen to various members of staff at the Department of Agriculture, other scientists, people from UOG. We also listened to the Fishermen of Guam, a great many of them, Madam Speaker. They were very visibly frustrated at the state of fishing on Guam. I don't think there's a single person on Guam that will deny that fish biomass has been reduced and that we need to do something about it and that it is urgent. But very many of them, Madam Speaker, that night talked about the various issues that not only Guam faces, but fishermen face that are reducing the fish populations or impacting them at the very least. They talked about spearfishing at night, or fishing at night, even without scuba, that was having an impact on our reefs. What was very impressed upon me that night, or that afternoon and evening, Madam Speaker, was that witness after witness testified about the indiscriminate raking of the reef, or raping of the reef, some of them used, by some on Yamaha boats. They even describe in detail, who go out at night and come in with coolers and coolers of fish for commercial sale. This is contrary and offensive to almost every fisherman and fisherwoman. It's being witnessed and reported, but there's been no news of arrests, citations, confiscations, or any other penalties. That, to me, was more remarkable than anything that I heard at that hearing, Madam Speaker, is that there are very obvious, enforceable actions that the people of Guam should be taking that are not being taken. And those are having serious impacts on the fishing stock. It also became apparent to me at the hearing that these concerns had repeatedly been raised to the Department of Agriculture to no avail. And sometimes they were responded to by the U.S. Coast Guard. They criticized the expenditure of funds on rescue personnel at both marinas that were not obligated to assist conservation officers in enforcement of marine preserve rules and fishing limits. Criticized, of course, the lack of expenditure on marine conservation officers compared to other independent nations. But it was very clear that the bill was creating somewhat of a divide among the fishermen in the community. And that is just because I think we have to acknowledge, Madam Speaker, that there are very many pressures on the environment on Guam at this time. We have 5 marine preserve areas, marine protected areas or marine preserves. These are all on one side of the island. This has limited the areas where fishermen can fish safely. We have 3 military firing ranges that also limit when fishermen can go out of the shores of those firing ranges. We have 2 contaminated sites where fishermen fish at their own risk and the risk of poisoning their families. There are fishing areas pronounced by military training and testing orders. There are, in Upper Harbor, many limitations on where you can go, where you can fish. The east side, the accessibility for fishermen is very limited because of it's the rougher side of Guam, but it's also, we haven't been able to successfully put in an access point for fishermen or rescue personnel. These are just some of the pressures on fishermen nowadays. And we heard many fishermen, including Mr. Ron Laguatnia, who's a very avid free dive fisherman, and we're very proud of the skills of our fishermen, Madam Speaker. But even he says, put for board, scuba spear at night. It's the night that he's concerned about. And he very vividly described the fish, how they sit, how they sleep, how they just don't move, and how you can grab them. He said, if you're strong enough, you can grab certain types of fish. And I think many of us have seen this for ourselves, Madam Speaker, and he was saying, this is what we really need to concentrate on, it's that nighttime fishermen. And then he, again, in detail described what he perceived to be this setup of high-speed boats, commercial enterprise, commercial breaking of the reef, of any indiscriminate fishing is really what they brought up, Madam Speaker. Indiscriminate, in not controlled as to size, amounts. They would go out over and over at night, different crews. They would, unload the boats and then replace the boats. And then we had other fishermen saying this was done by fishermen not even with scuba. And I'm still perplexed up to today, Madam Speaker, why, after hearing all of this testimony, we haven't heard from the Department of Agriculture why are they not able to enforce against indiscriminate fishing? And so what I worry about is, we all want to increase the fish stocks, but that was supposed to be the goal of the marine preserves. And we're seeing now that according to the Department of Agriculture, these MPAs were designed to be the replenishing source for Guam's reef fish. Analysis of data collected in the preserves demonstrates that the stocks were recovering. The fish stocks are beginning to recover. However, illegal fishing activities, also known as poaching in the preserves, have rendered the populations critical. I've talked to these conservation officers personally many times, Madam Speaker, and pretty much begged them. I have the mayor of Maritzo constantly telling me that the preserves down there, people are poaching them at night continuously. So I've asked, Department of Ag, well, why can't you go enforce these? Spend 30 days in Maritza alone and show us that either that's not true or that, we're going to do something about it. And I really feel like I don't blame these fishermen for being frustrated. If you take Maritza as just one example, they're limited because they have a preserve in one area of Maritza and the rest of the area is polluted by PCBs. That's the choices that they've been given, Madam Speaker. Many people asked us to put limits on the size and the type. And I guess what I'm getting at, Madam Speaker, is that we need to get to the root of the problem, the real root. Scuba is just a tactic. It's a method. It doesn't affect how many fish you get unless you fish indiscriminately, right? And you can do that without scuba, and we are all using technology in many different ways. But I would like for the Department of Agriculture to get to the root of the problem, and I would like for the legislature to get to the root of the problem. And if it's indiscriminate size, indiscriminate type, if we need to preserve certain types like they've done in Palau, that's what they've done. They've said no parrotfish, right? Except for certain exceptions, they want to preserve the parrotfish. And so the scientists have described to us why we need to keep the parrotfish. They're herbivores, they're protecting our reefs, and our reefs are under threat. So we get it, Madam Speaker, but I'm just saying our bills should be very much focused to hitting what the threat is. Before the MPAs I'm reading from a report that was put out by the Western Pacific Regional Fishery Management Council about the impact of marine preserve areas on the safety of fishermen on Guam. It was prepared by Devin Lucas, MS, and Jennifer Lincoln, PhD, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety. And it concludes that before MPAs were established in 1997, residents of Guam fished primarily in protected areas of the western leeward side and southern coast. Non-Chamorro residents were predominantly recreational users, while the Chamorro fishermen were more likely to subsist on the resource. As MPAs were established and enforced, the traditional and popular fishing grounds on the west coast and southern tip of the islands were restricted. Non-Chamorro recreational fishermen most likely scaled back their fishing activities since few accessible, safe areas remained open. That reduction in fishing activity would explain the sharp decrease in the number and rate of drowning deaths among non-Chamorro fishermen. At the same time, Chamorro subsistence fishermen began fishing more heavily on the east coast, windward side of the island. That increased exposure to more hazardous conditions resulted in a higher risk of drowning. The rise in fatalities after MPAs were enforced may be a result of fishermen operating in more dangerous waters off the east coast. I had heard rumors of this, so I looked it up finally and found that there was an actual report. They put it in writing that is one of the results of the MPAs. Now, we love these MPAs. We can go snorkeling there. We are hoping and praying that they are achieving their purpose of restocking the fish, and the effect was supposed to be that the fish would spill out of these preserves and that they would be more abundant for fishermen outside of the preserves. But the fishermen are telling us, Madam Speaker, that is not the case. We've got sedimentation, runoff, coral bleaching caused by climate. And so I'm just afraid, Madam Speaker, that we're not totally getting to the root of the problem. We're going to focus on scuba as opposed to number of fish, size of fish, registering the fishermen, licensing them, making them report was really one of the issues that Department of Agriculture pointed out, that they weren't reporting. So they aren't able to enforce, and allowing the Department of Agriculture to enforce. So I do appreciate the enforcement provisions of the bill that make it easier for the Department of Agriculture. But I just think, Madam Speaker, I just want to put on the record that we have many things impacted. We've seen in the news just this weekend about sonar activity. 99% now they're saying it's proven that it is impacting whales. And we just found out recently also that, I think in January, February, that they came out with a report showing for the first time that humpback whales are having their babies in the Mariana Islands waters. And that's new. And this is the same place where they've created the largest training and testing area for sonar, Madam Speaker. So I just wanted to put those on the record. Thank you.
Si Tusma, si Senator Therese Chirlai. On the motion, on the main motion, Senator Clint, I will recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in full support of this measure, of course, as a co-sponsor and as the committee chair that heard the hearing on the measure. We listened very closely to all the testimony we received, and we worked hard on amending the bill in committee to ensure that we introduced a bill that addressed the major concerns. There are many different pressures affecting the fish stocks on island. There's no question about that. There are many different pressures, from erosion to just plain old overfishing to the commercial fishing. So these are all issues that we will address in the future, and I do have plans to hold some hearings to hear from the community all of the pressures that are affecting fishing and the fish stock, so that we can address each one as we go along. This measure, however, addresses one of those major pressures, which is scuba spearfishing. Most of the people who testified in favor of scuba spearfishing are in it for commercial purposes. In fact, one individual owns the fish store down in Agate. When he was testifying, he didn't identify himself as a store owner. I had to ask the question, and then he said yes, he owns a store in Agate. Some of the other people who testified are also doing it for commercial purposes. So the scuba fishing that's being done, I believe, contrary to what some have said in the community, including some of those who testified, who represented it as a way to sort of catch fish for Tan Chai or catch fish for Uncle Joe who can't fish anymore. They're really doing it for commercial purposes. These are owners of fish stores who are testifying in favor of scuba fishing. So with that, I think it's prudent to ban scuba fishing. I think it's definitely affecting our fish stocks, and it's one of the major negative pressures on our fish stocks. So if we can at least address one of these pressures, we can begin to address all the others as we go along. We can't address everything in one piece of legislation. One piece of legislation can't stop erosion and scuba spearfishing and fishing in the preserves and all these other things. We need to address each one by one. So this is just the first step, is addressing scuba spearfishing. After that, we can go back and address some of the other issues. I agree there are problems with the marine preserves. I think the marine preserves have done well to build stocks within the preserves. The problem I'm hearing from a lot of local fishers is that right outside of the preserves, any fish who migrate out of the marine preserve into a non-preserve are immediately fished. So really the preserves are the only place where the fish stocks are very, very healthy. And you can hear that from anyone who goes into a marine preserve. They say there's still many, many fish in the marine preserves. They're just not spilling out as much as people had hoped they would spill out. I'm not too sure what the science said behind it as far as the theory behind it spilling out and whether or not it's actually achieved the level of overflow into the non-preserves as they had anticipated. I haven't read that data yet, but I do know anecdotally from fishermen who say that in the preserve, there's still quite a lot of fish. Outside the preserve, as soon as they spill out of the preserve, people catch them. There's people that go fishing and they'll basically line up right at the borders of the preserve and just wait for fish to cross the border and then bang, get them. So that's one of the problems that they're having with the fish preserves as far as spilling out outside of the preserves. So I've spoken to some people, including the Mauricio mayor and others who have some ideas about rotating the preserves, and that's something I'm actually interested in looking at. Perhaps that might be the answer, is to rotate preserves so that as they rejuvenate fish stocks in one area, they can move the preserve to another area, open up that other area. So that's something I'm interested in looking at, and I hope to hold some hearings in the future where we can flesh out all these ideas, all the concerns, and hopefully address each one of the pressures on our fishing industry or on our fishing environment and marine environment one by one, or one at a time at least. So with that, I rise in full support of this measure. I think this is just the first step. I think it's a major step, and I think it's the right step towards preserving our fish stocks for future generations. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Si Tusma, si Senator Clinton. Anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If Vice Speaker Nelson, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of this measure. I'd like to thank the sponsors for their courage in introducing this measure. This measure has also been attempted in 2013, and speaking with my father, who was eager to have me move this bill last term, it was a very delicate issue. I did not have the courage to do so, so I apologize to my dad for that. But again, I thank my colleagues for having the courage to do this. Madam Speaker, this is really a testament of where are we going to protect the interests of our future generations. Where are we going to ensure that our nieces, our nephew, our sons, our daughters, and our younger cousins will be able to see the beauty of our island that our grandparents gave to us? This is our opportunity to dedicate to continue this protection that our grandparents has taught us, this protection of the land, the protection of our waters. And yes, it's a highly political situation. We have people doing it for profit. We have people doing it as a sport. We have people doing it to help out their families for subsistence. But overall, Madam Speaker, we see in scientific studies that the fish surrounding our island is depleting. And I just want to read a couple of these scientific studies. From Fenner D. 2012, so that's about 8 years ago now. Challenges for managing fisheries on diverse coral reefs. Spearfishing or scuba spearfishing is a significant control on effort. A scuba spearfishing ban is accepted and appears to have relatively high compliance in American Samoa. But at night, spearfishing ban would be difficult to implement in Pohnpei. So these are our neighboring islands, our neighboring Micronesian brothers and sisters, neighboring states that are looking to preserve their fisheries, to preserve the fish around their islands. Stoffel, BW, and SD Allen, 2012. Fishermen feel night spearfishing with the use of scuba is another factor that leads to the decline of certain species, especially reef fish. Fishermen feel that scuba diving is a method that allows for inappropriate levels of efficiency. Inappropriate levels. Coupled with its use at night to target various species that sleep in rock, reef cracks, or under ledges, scuba makes it even more efficient, and in the opinion of many of the fishermen, creates an opportunity for fishermen to take much more than necessary. Hockpey Rhodes, 2012. Despite the likely use of illegal scuba fishing techniques in CNMI and its legal use in Guam, significantly smaller sizes of many target reef fish were reported in comparison with yap and the known size at reproductive maturity. This is alarming considering that deeper waters act as refuges from fishing, pressure, and support fish assemblages that are comparable with long-standing no-take marine protected areas. The introduction of new fishing techniques, spear guns, flashlights, and monofilament nets were thought to be drivers of these trends, especially salient as traditional management and law do not encompass modern technology. Richard B. L. Williams, large body species including bumphead parrotfish, humphead ross, stingrays, parrotfish jacks, emperors, and groupers are considered rare in Guam, and it has been suggested that this may be the result of heavy fishing. Technological improvements which have facilitated the expansion of activities like nighttime scuba, spearfishing, have resulted in reappearance of larger species in fishery catch statistics. While it is possible that this resurgence in catches indicates greater targeting of healthy populations, it would seem more likely that such increases are related to the use of new technology, representing the next step in the serial depletion cycle seen in many fisheries. And so, Madam Speaker, it's not just about protecting our fisheries anymore, it's about protecting the area that surrounds the fishery. We would be blind to think, Madam Speaker, that if we go into the future in the fishery, that's where all the fish is going to be, and they're not going to be able to thrive outside of it. We need to be concerned about the water surrounding our island as a whole, not just a specific area. Madam Speaker, I want to tell you something. You know, I have a younger brother, and he has really taken after my father. And I'm so proud of him because he is a true pescador. He is very selective with the type of fish he catches, because he wants to make sure, at the young age of 21 now, he wants to make sure that these fishes have the opportunity to grow and prosper. So he is selective with what he catches, and he doesn't use a scuba tank. He goes in the deep waters, and sometimes by himself, which takes a lot of courage, something I would not do alone, and he would go and pick these fish out. And this is amazing to see. The youth care about our environment. They care about the reefs. They care about the food substance. It's not about money to them anymore, because money can always be replaced. You can always make money in various different ways, but you can never replace what you do to the environment. We will never replace the fish that we have taken out of these oceans if we continue to do it. I cannot even say unresponsibly, because unresponsibly is not even the right word for this drastic measure that we're doing. We're destroying our ocean if we don't start taking a strong stance at protecting the fishes in it, protecting the habitat. And for what? For political pressure? For money? There's not going to be any more fish left. Madam Speaker, sometimes I go to my family ranch, and at night, by like 11 o'clock at night, the full moon is out, and you know what I see? I see 5 mosquito boats spending 2 hours right along the La Mesa in scuba gear, spearfishing. They're not spearfishing for subsistence. They're not spearfishing to puksai families. They're spearfishing for profit. And sometimes, perhaps many times, that fish goes to waste. And you know, there's really nothing we can do but just try to yell at them and tell them to get out of there. There's no laws imposed to tell the people that, hey, this is wrong. We need to protect our future. Yes, we have difficulty regulating a lot of things and enforcing a lot of things, but if we don't stop mentioning that these things should be against the law so that we need to protect our island and its resources, then nobody will act. There will be no movement to push for enforcement. As the Oversight Chair for Conservation last year, I went on a boat ride, and Lieutenant Uggan was practically yelling at me. You see all these mosquito boats? They're the ones that are raping our fish, are raping our reefs. We don't have the people to support it. And you know what? They didn't even have their own boat. They had to borrow GCC's boat. So yes, there are areas that we need to improve in our government for reasons of enforcement and measures of enforcement. And the Oversight Chair of Department of Agriculture has mentioned a lot of the initiatives that is going to be pushed. Positive things, Madam Speaker, that protects our resources. We expect 8 conservation officers to not only cover the land, but we expect them to cover the EE zone around our island. Because there's no law saying, hey, you should not do that. Well, now today we have an opportunity to say, hey, you should not do that. You should not go scuba spearfishing at night and be greedy and take what you want for profit. You should not rape our reefs so that your children and our siblings won't have the opportunity to see the beautiful abundance that we grew up in our ocean? My sister, when we were younger, we came here to testify when we were talking about the firing range. And she said something so powerful. She said, all we're asking is to allow us to have the same thing that you had growing up. Allow us to see the same beauty that you had growing up. It's about who we are as a people. It's about our love for each other, our love for our island. So, Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of this bill and any other measure that's going to make sure that we protect our island and our waters. And again, I want to thank my colleagues who sponsored this bill for their courage to do so when I lacked. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I do apologize, Vice Speaker. Thank you so much for your presentation. Anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else on the main motion? Senator Regine Biscoli, you are recognized.
Sujos Maasi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd also like to thank the retiring speaker for her remarks, and I also want to rise in full support of Bill 53-35 COR as substituted and ask my colleagues for their support to help pass this long-awaited effort to protect the ocean that surrounds our beautiful island. Colleagues, our island neighbors have led on this issue for years now, with Palau setting aside its first marine preserve in the 1950s and banning scuba spearfishing in 1994, and the CNMI banning it in 2003, it's high time that we join them as regional leaders to protect our natural resources. A 2014 study conducted by a team from the University of Western Australia assessed the impact of scuba spearfishing on Guam, where scuba spearfishing is practiced, and the CNMI, where it's been banned since 2003. Their findings showed scuba spearfishing to be associated with the declining size of fish over time in Guam. Their findings further suggested that scuba spearfishing impacts reef fish populations and that the restriction of this fishing method will ensure refuge for fish populations in deeper waters. Madam Speaker, as a small island, our waters and our reefs serve as our main resources. They provide a lifeline for fisherwomen like Chanel Salazar and Monique Almani, the aquatic business owners like Jean-Pierre and Sarah Hamilton. Bill 53 will preserve and aid in the recovery of our important coral reef species and improve the sustainability of our coral reef fisheries. Madam Speaker, as was mentioned earlier today, we sat and we listened to testimony for hours on this bill, and I'd like to thank everyone who came out to testify on this measure. We heard their concerns and frustrations about depleting fish stocks and the need to increase enforcement. I would also like to thank the Department of Agriculture for their continued work to protect our natural resources, even with limited resources themselves. We have heard their request for a larger investment in the hiring of conservation officers at the department. And while the FY 2020 budget allows for the hiring of 2 more conservation officers, I hope with all this increased general funding general fund spending, we can all work together as a body to secure more funding for the department's conservation efforts. Lastly, I'd like to take the time to thank Speaker Bj Cruz, who introduced a similar effort in the 30th Guam Legislature. Despite the measure not moving forward then, Speaker Cruz's foresight to protect our reefs have paved the way for this effort today, and it's only fitting that he celebrates his birthday today. Happy birthday, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for our people. Colleagues, this isn't the time to straddle the fence. We need to push for increased enforcement and education on these issues. The alarm bells have been sounding for years now as our reef species continue to deplete. As stewards of our island's resources, it is our responsibility to do everything in our power to curb the destruction caused by the so-called, quote, efficient practice of scuba spearfishing in our reefs. Leilani Sablan, a local biologist, put it best, and I quote her, "I want to live to see a day when the reefs on Guam are restored, and I don't have to fly in a plane to dive in places like Yap and Palau to see what a healthy reef looks like with tons of fish. I want to be able to walk to the nearest beach, put on some fins, and see our marine life thriving right here in my island home. And I want this for my future children too, and for generations to come." I share Leilani's passion as she expressed to us in her testimony. And I'm so happy and blessed and grateful to be able to spend time with my children in our oceans. My children are avid swimmers. They love to spend time at the beach and exploring our island and its bountiful resources. And we need to protect those resources for them and for future generations. To that point, Madam Speaker, we start every single session with our inifresi to protect and defend our waters. Colleagues, Bill 53 gives us an opportunity to do what is right for generations to come. And again, I ask my colleagues for their support of this measure. I thank the author and the co-sponsors and the chair for reporting this out of his committee, and I look forward to the passage of this bill. Sidos Masi.
Situs Masi, Senator Lee. Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You would think that with a measure like this that had widespread support across many countries and in our region as well, that it should have been something implemented many years ago. You would think that it was as easy as that. But yet it remains a very delicate subject nonetheless for many of us. And I want to just speak from the heart. I am now in my third generation of scuba divers in our family. It started with myself and my husband, my children, and now my husband and I are actively engaged in getting our grandchildren certified to scuba dive for the reason that we want them to appreciate nature and to understand it so that they too can protect it as they grow. And no better way than to immerse them in that. I also come from a long lineage of fishermen, my uncle having been Gregorio Perez, who caught the world record marlin and who was a fisherman for all his life, who our marina is now named after. So nature and loving nature is very, very dear to us, obviously, as a Chamorro people. But, you know, when this bill was first introduced, I had a discussion with two people who are who are fishermen who also use it as a way of life. And what concerned me about this whole issue that we're talking about is we have now pushed ourselves to a point where measures like this are needed to be entertained because we have lost our moral compass as a culture in terms of fishing. One of my cousins, who is my age, grew up as a fisherman in Tumon. when Tumon Bay was the place where you caught, the little minas and the tiao and some of the traditional fishes that right now aren't prevalent in Tumon Bay. And Peter and I were talking about, what is the state of Guam fisheries on? What is the state of fisheries on Guam? Are we truly depleted or are we not? And, it goes both sides. One would say that based on the number of fish catches, that Guam's fish population is still plentiful and safe. But for a while, most people who went fishing understood the science of fishing. Fishing was determined by the seasons, by the moons, by the tides. The fishermen on Guam self-regulated. And my cousin Manny Duenas also talks about this all the time. If you leave it to the fishermen to self-regulate, you will not have a situation now where they are just reaping the reefs and just depleting the fish stocks. If people truly self-regulated, and I think that is where we went wrong on this island. We no longer self-regulate. We've become a population where greed now takes over as the precedent when it comes even to fishing. Not entirely, but for the most part. That with pollution and certain environmental concerns like climate change and have also gone into that. But I think what troubles us, many of us, so much about this bill is while it is a first step, it is hardly the catch-all, as many of my colleagues spoke today. It is not the catch-all. And to simply rely on this as the answer to now restoring fish populations is really short-sighted. And I know that there's been some promise that we're going to go further and look at all the other issues that have to be addressed, like the people in the Yamaha fleet that are going out and fishing day and night and just depleting and using means that are probably not only not recommended, but which are borderline illegal. But I think what I just wanted to point out is while we feel that this is an obvious thing to do, the bill in itself is very shallow in terms of a one approach to a multi-approach solution to a problem on Guam. And I'm not necessarily pledging my support or non-support for the bill, but I just want to express that while we are moving towards a bill that looks like it's going to pass, it is going to have consequences on those people who truly rely on fishing as a way of life, who see this as just one measure that doesn't really address the graver picture, which is the other practices that were brought up at the public hearing of night fishing, of the people that are diving deep and just depleting the fish stock at greater depths. But I just want to say for those of us that have a true love for the environment, who understand what the beauty of the undersea is like, who understand the importance of fish and the ocean in our culture, that we really have to take a broader look at how we've lost our moral compass on this island, and that if this is a first step towards regaining that sense of coming to terms with what we're doing and what we're doing wrong, then perhaps it is a good first step. But I think that to rely on this solely as it is, the bill banning scuba diving, it will probably first and foremost have an effect on those people that rely on fishing as a way of life, whether it is commercial, and there are very few of them on Guam that now rely on scuba fishing as a way of life. It will hurt those people, but I think overall we have to understand that we have in fact already hurt ourselves, and we've come to a place in Guam that I think many of us who grew up in a traditional fishing lifestyle, or new family members who are traditional fishermen, regret that we are at this point right now. And I just wanted to express my reservations really about how we had to approach it in this manner, but nonetheless, I think that it is inevitable that we are headed down that road, and that is what we have to do to now take greater and bolder steps to ensure that our oceans and that our fish stock and that our reefs are healthy and thriving again. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sita Somasi, Senator Torres. Senator Castro, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of 5335. When the bill was first introduced, I was somewhat apprehensive in terms of coming out and speaking in favor of the measure. As a matter of fact, it's because I had some history as the former director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, and in my own admission, Madam Speaker, I was associating with a bunch, or at least a few good, responsible fishermen, folks like Felix Regis, Michael Duenas. I was even given the privilege to interact with folks on the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council who were able to make arguments with the science behind them in terms of debating one way or the other on fishery stocks. Madam Speaker, this issue facing the fishing community and our marine resources is not a new one. As a matter of fact, in the previous administration, in my prior capacity, we even worked with legislators and the administration at the time to look at drone technology, to look at supplementing the Conservation Officer Corps. We even looked at writing a competitive grant, the Salston-Stall-Kennedy grant, which was successfully awarded to Guam and the CNMI in a joint effort, and at the time was the largest competitive award for the Marianas. That was designed to improve the fishery data information between the two jurisdictions. I think my point there was that we all acknowledged then, as it's been stated several times today, Madam Speaker, that this in part is an enforcement issue. It's an enforcement issue dependent on not just manpower. It's an enforcement issue also dependent on some of the rules that apply. You see, while I can admit there are certain improvements that can be made to the statute, Madam Speaker, it's my opinion that the statute is replete. It's sufficient with the provisions of law to regulate the industry. But it's the implementation, I think, is where we need additional help. It wasn't until the public hearing, Madam Speaker, on this particular bill that I learned of other types of atrocities that have befallen our maritime community, our marine community, rather. In terms of a submerged tekin, I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that's a strategy where you can put a tekin or a tintulu and weight it down below the water line so that you can harvest indiscriminately, as one retiring speaker had pointed out, so that you can go within this certain diameter and scare the fish into this net at night with scuba gear indiscriminately. I didn't know that. I'm just so happy for myself that I was able to learn about this horrific fishing practice. On top of that, Madam Speaker, of all the things that were coming out at the public hearing, I had the privilege again to be at the boat basin and to be guided by someone like Uncle Johnny Atulay, who would take me to the edge of that wharf area and say, take a look at those boats coming in. Do you see them? See those boats coming in? And I mean, the obvious answer was yes, of course. But to the untrained eye, I didn't know what the issue was. And the issue, while you may not notice it, there are a lot of fundamental problems wrong with that particular instance. The boat coming in, I don't know, without a front light, without a rear light, until the boat comes in. So aside from the safety issues that govern the ports of Guam, there's an issue of overharvesting. There's an issue of harvesting indiscriminately, as my colleague said at least half a dozen times. And so my position would be this, Madam Speaker, on Bill 5535. My final resolve as one of 15 members of this body is that if we can't monitor and govern certain types of fishing, whether it's scuba or otherwise, then this is, at least on its face, is one step in the right direction towards getting a handle on what's going on. It's helping us as a lawmaking body on behalf of this community pare back, if you will, pull back the skins of that onion in order that we can better understand the phenomena facing our marine community. Another colleague put it best, or at least put it sufficiently for me, that if we can't self-regulate, and I gotta tell you, that's where I was initially torn last term. There are a few good, responsible scuba fishers who don't do it just for subsistence, but also do it for commercial practices to earn a little more on rare types of species. But they're responsible about it. As a matter of fact, they represent themselves in certain types of fishing communities. There's actually a panel that's part of a larger regional body, and they sit on that. And they talk about what it means to be a responsible fisher with scuba. But unfortunately, as my colleague iterated, a few good fishers is not enough to hold back the onslaught, the wave of people coming into this jurisdiction and raping our reefs. You know, we're discouraged from pointing out our colleagues by name, but in this case, I want to strengthen her resolve that I don't think she lacked the fortitude in the 34th Guam Legislature. As a matter of fact, I walked back after her impassioned speech and I commended her. She didn't lack the fortitude. What we didn't have, and I hope we have today, or at least in this session of this month, in this term, is we have the political will to pass this measure. You know, Senator, to your credit, to your father's credit, what really tore me apart that last term, and I was there on your family's property, and he was pointing out there were no boats, mosquito boats, but he was pointing out at the exact location when he was yelling out at these fishers who were raping the reef, in his words, okay? And we hear that phrase all the time. But he's familiar because he fishes down there. And we're not just talking about indiscriminate fishing. We're talking about harvesting of certain types of, I'm no scientist, but shell creatures. They would harvest them underwater and then stack the shells. You believe that? I didn't even know that happens. So you could talk to scientists who studies these things and other fishers. But here's the part that got me, Madam Speaker. What got me was that you have a duly, legally recognized native of this great Chamorro nation who was shouting out warnings about the abuse and exploitation of marine resources on what could arguably be their homeland, our homeland, his extended family property, if you will. And you know what happened? They retorted, they responded with an obscene gesture to this proud Chamorro man. And that just, for the purposes of maintaining proper decorum, Madam Speaker, that just really it's beyond words. I'm sure you know exactly what needs to be said. I guess I would close, Madam Speaker. The regulations are sufficient. The enforcement of them can use a lot of work. But when you get out there and you violate the fundamental tenet of our Pacific way of life, of this great Chamorro nation, then we've got a crisis on our hands. And so I want to encourage my colleagues to take a bold position with the author and co-authors of this measure and those who speak in advocacy of its passage, to vote in favor of this measure, as unpopular as it may be in certain circles of our community, at least until we have a better way forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Castro. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Sabina, would you like to close?
Excuse me, Madam Speaker. At this time, I would like to request a brief recess. At the request, legal counsel has proposed certain language change, a language change in part of the bill.
You know what? It's 10 minutes to lunchtime. Vice Speaker, Majority Leader Nelson.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to recess until 1400 today, till 2 p.m.
2 p.m. We are in recess.